Hopefully you can all see my presentation, the slide deck. So firstly, following on from this morning's conversations, croeso, Prynhawn da, or welcome and good afternoon. I thought we'd get a bit of Welsh in on the slide deck. So what we'll be discussing really in the next 45 minutes, it's kind of a lot to cover, but an upgraded sort of slide deck and discussion around micro-segmentation, this time utilizing vRealize Network Insight and NSX-T. But this is sort of an updated version of previous VMware presentations where the sessions have revolved around NSX for vSphere and the built-in application rule manager that has. But we'll be focusing, as I say, on Network Insight and NSX-T data center today to try and micro-segment applications. So in terms of what we'll cover then in the next 45 minutes, essentially an overview of micro-segmentation, what the cell is, what we try to get to as a goal, and then we'll have a quick discussion around the reality and the fact that despite all these wonderful tools, to truly implement the zero trust within an environment is a little bit more challenging than simply a click a button and it's done overnight. So we'll discuss that. We then look at application discovery, so utilizing Network Insight, how we can visualize the traffic flows and applications dependencies, specifically around challenges with zero documentation or lack of understanding around an application. And then we'll jump into the lab, which is whirring behind me. And I think the room I'm in at the moment is it's got to be pushing 30. So it's rather balmy and nice and warm, this sauna. So we'll jump in and we'll actually utilize NSX-T and the data gathered from Verni to segment or micro-segment an application, so we can lock it down nicely. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion if there's time at the very end. So, okay, so let's, before we really get going, let's quickly introductions. My name is Gareth Lewis. I'm a senior consultant at Xtravirt, specializing in cloud networking and security, and specifically NSX. IT for nearly 20 years, VMware products for 11, and VMware NSX, really before it was NSX, back in the vCloud networking and security days, back in 2013. The expert NSX and Pro as of this year. So I joined Gareth into the Pro team, which is great. And then various social media links there. If this session is of interest, then please do reach out and we can again chat about challenges and ways forward if you've got any queries there. So okay, micro-segmentation, right? It's been talked about for years now, and what is it? How do we do it? We'll cover that in the next few minutes. But essentially, I think to visualize what micro-segmentation is or can be, I think this slide really still holds its own. So we talk about houses versus hotels, and specifically around the controls that we place or used to place around our network. Simply used to exist with perimeter firewalls. Okay, we used to have some controls within the perimeter, such as OS firewalls, but generally, if there was a breach, it could be seen as generally easy to traverse the network there and move laterally inside the perimeter. Whereas then we look at the sort of hotel approach where, we're allowed into the lobby and really from there you need specific access or controls to reach maybe back of house and certainly the floors and absolutely the hotel rooms themselves. So generally much more, I think, a micro-segmented approach, and we can visualize that looking at that houses versus hotels. Now, the reality, unfortunately, is micro-segmentation itself should be easy, right? But more often than not, I think the biggest challenge that I find with customers is generally IT, and by design, right? We don't have that deep ingrained understanding of how an application works, what its dependencies are. And we're IT, right? We're operations. We don't need to care about that. We've got application teams, we've got development teams, we've got public vendors, and of course they all offer fantastic documentation around the firewalling requirements, and just generally the application itself. In reality, not so much. There are some big vendors out there that, you know, kind of struggle with this, and certainly internal teams also struggle. So how then really are we supposed to micro-segment our applications? How are we supposed to understand how our applications work, and what virtual machines, what services, what applications make up that wider application if we don't have the documentation? Well, okay, enter vRealize Network Insight, right? So in the network insight sort of world, we don't really need documentation, but we still need an understanding of how an application should work, and really what ports, protocols, services those systems require to access in order to work. Everything else we should be able to drop, and the application should continue to work. Okay, so although we say that we don't need documentation, I think we still need to work with those application owners, those development teams, to ensure that we have a better, wider understanding of how the application works. But then network insights, if we just jump to the next slide, you know, so what is it? Okay, so by essentially using network insight, we can essentially better understand our applications. So network insight allows us to visualize the traffic flows of the applications themselves. And then in this session, what I want to demonstrate is how we can, one, automate the discovery of our applications, so that we can then in turn interrogate and analyze the collected data flows. But then we can also use network insight to, by having identified the analyzed and collected data flows, we can then implement micro-segmentation by utilizing NSX-T data center. Okay, so via the two products, they hugely complement each other. So if we move on then, so first of all, we need to, you know, define our applications, okay, or discover them. And there's several sort of options we have to do that within Network Insight, and I'll show you this in more detail in the demo shortly. So first up, obviously, we can simply manually define an application, but then we have dynamic implementations as well. Okay, so we can discover applications, for example, leveraging vSphere tags and/or custom attributes, but we can also discover applications utilizing VM naming convention, for example. Lastly there, which I won't be covering today, is we can integrate it, or we can integrate Network Insight with CMDB, such as ServiceNow, but I won't be covering that today. So we've got numerous options there, plenty, and obviously there are pros and cons for both, or all of those options. So then I'll just run through the options very quickly, and then we'll jump into the lab to show you this firsthand. But simply to add an application manually, we simply click the option to do so, and then we can sort of define what we want makes up that application. Okay, so this would obviously work for smaller applications where the documentation is either very good, or maybe the application is made up of a very small subset of systems or VMs. So we simply give the application a name, we define the tiers, and in this application we've simply got a database tier, which I define here in the middle box as DB. I add in, so I can actually select the virtual machines, because this Network Insight is obviously integrated with vCenter Server. So we can simply choose the infantilized VMs, which make up that database tier, and then I can add additional tiers. In this case, I'll simply add a web tier and select the relevant VM that makes up that tier as well. Once done, we're given a nice visual schematic of the application itself. Once it's had time to collect the data flows, we're given a nice visual as to what actually connects to what, and we can delve into that information to actually analyze those data flows in readiness for micro-segmentation. Application option 2, rather, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, we can utilize vSphere tags and or custom attributes. So again, I've got a couple of virtual machines here which have been assigned custom attributes, and they've been configured with an application name and a tier within. So again, then this will filter through into Network Insight. We can click Discover Applications, and then we can sort of build out that definition criteria, whereby the application is defined by the custom attribute that we've defined within vSphere, and likewise the tiers are also assigned the custom attribute. Once we hit the discover button, that will go off and find our applications or discover them. From the screenshot in front of you, we can see 4 have been discovered. Okay, we can see the VM names that sort of make up that wider application. Okay, so in application 001, for example, we've got a database server and a web server, nice and simple. Okay, so when we hit close and we hit save, we have our 4 applications saved. But of course, option 2, that comes with a managerial overhead, right, or an administrative overhead, whereby first of all, we need to create the vSphere custom attributes or tags, and we have to assign them. So what we can do is option 3, we can essentially utilize a virtual machine naming convention. Now, I understand these can change, you know, almost sort of monthly, depending on whether we get new staff, new ideas about VM naming conventions, all that nice stuff. But generally, you'll have some naming conventions within an organization that you can use to discover these applications. Okay. So again, we hit discover. Now we're looking at names. And what we will use is the Network Insight pattern builder to build out the regular expression to define our applications. And in this example, I've called up a virtual machine that I have in my environment. Okay, so it's got the application name in the first sort of segment, then the web segment, or the role segment, sorry. In this case, this is web, and then the iterative number there. Now, the first section here, as I've said, defined in my environment the application name. So that's nice and simple for myself. But what we've got here, you can see the 4 applications that it's rediscovered from the previous option I showed you. But I've also got a number of virtual machines within my environment that utilize, although the similar sort of naming convention, they offer, they provide a different role. Okay, so we've got VGL for the Gareth Lewis, that all starts there. And we've got infrastructure stuff. Okay, and likewise, I've got Veeam backup or application stuff within my environment. So again, it's called them up. That's fine, because all we're doing at this point is defining the criteria to define an application. So we hit submit, then we progress on to defining the tiers, again, via the pattern builder. And in this case, in my environment, the second segment after the dash is simply web. Okay, so in this case, it's a web tier, but we're defining where in the naming convention the role or the tier is defined. And likewise, again, it's found the applications, it's found the tiers within the applications, but it's also found other environments within my, or rather other systems or tiers within my environment that it thinks or matches the criteria that we're building out. And again, no problem with that, because we're going to choose which applications we want to absorb into the environment. So after clicking submit and discover, we're shown the applications again. Much like the previous slide, I think this is less work, really. I mean, if you've got naming convention in place, what you don't need to do is create those custom attributes or tags and actually manually assign them. There are, you know, it's more of a helpfully dynamic process, I think, to defining your applications. But there are options, there are flavors of defining these applications. Some work better than others in some environments. And as I say, some work better for some customers than others also, but you've got the options there to leverage. So then once our applications are defined and we've sort of built out the dependencies of that wider applications, then we really need to delve on and dive into the data flows and the traffic flows that this will identify. So we're shown an overview of most of our applications. Okay, we're given nice visuals that then we can sort of export into reports and nice reports for the management. That's all good stuff. And we can see here that our database tier has one virtual machine. Likewise, the web has one virtual machine. Both talk to the internet. That's interesting in itself. Again, we'll take a look at those traffic flows in a moment. We've got this other sort of unrecognized box here. Again, we'll identify that. And we've got shared physical infrastructure that both access. But the important one here is we can see database servers talking to web servers and vice versa. So again, this is really helpful good information that we need now to sort of build out our rule sets in readiness for our NSX-T distributed firewall rules. So what Network Insight gives us is the famous Verney donut. Okay, so we can utilize this to, again, visualize the traffic flow. So we can see between the database tier and the web tier, we can see web is hitting database and it's also hitting the internet, shared services, other stuff as well. And by clicking into these, we're then shown our flows. And this is the real important area of Network Insight, certainly from a micro-segmentation approach, because we're shown these nice ports. And we'll look at this live in the lab in a few moments. Essentially what we've got here, you can see we've got an internal management address, or an internal subnet address, sorry, to my network. So that's trusted. We're hitting the web server via port 443. Great, we expect to see that. It's a web server. Likewise, we can see the web server here is trying to talk to the database server here on port 3306. Again, fantastic. That's what we expect to see, the web server accessing the MySQL database on the database server. But then, interestingly, we've got the web server itself trying to hit an IP address in Zurich via port 123. Now, yeah, okay, this is an out-of-the-box appliance, and it's probably been configured to access NTP via a range of public servers, but not what we want. Okay, so we'll, by design, in a moment when we jump into the lab, we will block that by design. Okay, so what we're going to do is only allow the ports that we know we need. Anything else is going to get dropped. So what Network Insight will give us as well is, based on the flows, it will recommend firewall rules. Okay, now again, this Network Insight is sort of firewall agnostic. Okay, it's not designed to specifically integrate and import rules into NSX. We can utilize this for physical firewalls, other branded virtual firewalls, and of course the VMware ecosystem NSX. So for example, what we have here, we've got web talking to the internet via 123, as we said. Okay, so we don't want that, so I've unticked it. Web to DB for MySQL, great, we want that. Physical to web on 443, they're web servers, again, fantastic. That's what we'd expect. And we've got other stuff here, like web servers trying to access other physical devices via DNS. Now, I've already got rules stored within the distributed firewall of NSX, so we won't need to do any exporting with that. Now, what we can do, and I won't be covering this in this session, but we've essentially got the ability to export all of this information to either CSV or XML, and then utilizing a Python script, we can do an automated import. But remember, everything we see here isn't necessarily valid or innocent. Okay, we need to have that deeper understanding of the application, work with the application owners, the developers and vendors to make sure that we're only implementing the firewall rules that we require. Everything else should be dropped. Okay, so don't just take it as a pinch of salt and as given that everything needs to be allowed. There needs to be an element of visual inspection to validate and approve these rules. So, as I mentioned, we can utilize this to build out our NSX-T distributed firewall rules. And again, we'll jump into the lab in a moment to show you this in detail. But essentially what we've got is a two-tier application. Okay, so we know from the documentation that we do have, the ports needed obviously are 443 to the web server. Okay, the web server needs to talk to the database server over port 3306. And then other than that, we're unsure. Okay, so what we want to do is leverage Network Insight to ensure that the application doesn't break as soon as we implement a sort of per application zero trust model. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll just switch screens a moment and we'll just jump into Network Insight just to show you the application. So 2 seconds, let me reshare. So hopefully you can see my next screen. We're in Network Insight. And this is an application that I've already discovered. So I've got one application here. Again, it's a small lab environment, which today is creating more heat than I'd like, but that's fine. Wish this was in winter. turn the heating off. So when we get into the application itself, as I said, we'll take a real look now at the application and the flows within it. Okay, so we're given when it loads, we're given a number of nice visuals again that we can use for either reporting or to actually interrogate the traffic flows. Okay, so again, I can see we've got one virtual machine here, which is our web 01, and likewise in the database tier, I've got the DB server as well. Okay. And we can see things are accessing the internet. We can see things are accessing shared physical systems. That's all great, and that's what we expect to see. But let's delve a little deeper then. If I expand micro-segmentation, again, we've got the donut, the network insight donut. And by hovering over certain things, I can see, okay, so my web tier is accessing the database tier, and we can see the flows here and follow them through. Likewise, it's trying to access the internet, shared services, and all that good stuff. Okay, so we can start now to delve a little deeper. Now, we'll be spending a huge amount of time on Network Insight and what else it can do. This is just one small section or feature of Network Insight. Again, if we'd like to know more, then I've got some links at the very end, or feel free to reach out and we can have a deeper chat around all things Network Insight. So let's look at the flows then for the web tier. And again, we'll utilize and use these flows to validate, analyze, and then eventually create our distributed firewall rules. So again, this is a lab environment. This is running right now. We're hosting essentially a WordPress blog. Okay, so this is the web front end. This is web 01, and the database server itself is DB01. Okay, both live within vSphere. Simple two-tier, 2 VM solution. But again, we need to lock this down as part of a new security posture. Okay, so essentially we're given 16 flows. Again, it's a small environment, small application, and again, web 01 is trying to talk to DB01 on port 3306. Awesome, that's what we expect to see. We've got some maybe unknowns that as IT guys and girls we would really need to do a bit of research on. So we've got web 01 here trying to talk to something in the US via port 443. Might want to look into that. We might want to validate and approve it. Now, this is actually WordPress. This is actually one of the WordPress servers utilized for updates. So again, I've validated and approved that. But again, this might be an internal web server. We might want to fully lock that down for no external access, which we will by design in a few moments. Again, we've got another WordPress database, a WordPress public server there. We've got something trying to talk to something in London. Don't trust that one, so we're going to block that by default. We've got DNS and domain services. We've got something in Ashburn, US. Again, we won't allow that. Then we've got 123s and all that nice stuff. Okay. And as I mentioned in an earlier slide, we're given the recommended firewall rules. Okay. Now, again, recommended, is that the right word? It could be misconstrued slightly. You know, we don't take these as valid instantly, and we certainly won't be creating the distributed firewalls based on these. So really what we're going to take from this is, okay, we need to allow any source to our web servers via port 443. We certainly want to allow web to the database tier to speak over 3306 or MySQL, and anything else we may want to block. Okay, so we've got others coming in over port 22. Again, it's a web server, SFTP, for example, appliance management via SSH, all good stuff. So again, we might want to create those. As I mentioned, port 53 or DNS, then great. Our internal systems all have access to DNS, so that's accounted for already. But there's other things like 123 to public sources we might want to block. Obviously, our infrastructure has our own NTP servers, and we just might want to reach out to the developers or vendors to ask what's going on here. Okay, so again, all awesome information that we can use, we can write reports around, and we can present to either the application owners and to the developers. Okay, so we know what we want to do. How do we do it? Okay, so if we just jump over to NSX, it's almost timed me out. What I want to do first of all is just do a bit of admin to sort of group up essentially some inventory items. Okay, so what I've done already, I've created a number of security groups essentially, and these are, so we've got the application name that we've identified via Network Insight. Okay, application T001 that identifies the tenant, and then we've got the application A001, which is the application O1. Just jump back here. What I've created is a group of all servers. Okay, now the definition for this is a virtual machine with a name starting with T001, A001. So again, nice dynamic group that any other servers get added within vSphere, they'll be added to these rules automatically. Likewise, for the database servers, again, a rule starting virtual machine starts with T001, A001-DB, and likewise for web-web. Okay, so again, if we want to scale out these applications, increase the number of web servers, for example, database backend servers, we can, and we can automatically or dynamically add these servers to these groups by using these dynamic naming conventions. So all good. What we can do then is utilize these groups within our firewall rules. Okay, so if we just jump into security and distributed firewall. So what have we done? We've utilized Network Insight to identify the rules that we need. As I say, we can automate the import of the firewall rules and the distributed or the security groups via a Python script. I won't cover that in today's session, mainly because there's an element of what can go wrong. Okay, and as I'm running a live demo, I thought it'd be best to do that manually. But a couple of links at the end of the slide deck, which I'll share, and which do cover that in one of my earlier blog posts. So that gives you all the information there as well. So to give you a bit of background, we've got a number of rules in place already. So we've got domain services, we've got infrastructure services for testing and all that kind of stuff. So we've got NTP, AD, and DNS, and we've got ICMP as well. Now, what by default NSX will do, we sort of come at this using a default connectivity strategy, and that's what earlier versions of NSX used to call this, or NSX-T used to call this. But now the default strategy is what we class as blacklist, or as the blacklist option. Okay, so essentially we want to deny traffic because we have a default any allow rule. So essentially anything that lives within this environment is allowed to talk. And for myself, and in this environment, we can class it as maybe a brownfield environment. We onboard applications and services, and we allow them to continue to talk as normal. And by onboarding them, we haven't broken them. Okay, so by essentially flipping this to drop, we would effectively break any application that lives on there unless it's got the whitelisted rules already set up. But what we can do now, we can start to build out our policy and our firewall rules. Okay, so we'll come back to this blog in a moment. You can see it still works. We can jump into the post. We can see we've got a load of test text in there. Generally, we can jump around the website. It all works all nice. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll just jump back to NSX and we'll create a new policy. And we'll call it T001, 8001. And underneath this, we'll begin to flesh out our rules. Okay, so what I'll do first of all, because we're effectively creating a per application micro-segmentation or zero trust on a per application basis, what I'll do first of all is I will create deny rules. So I'll create an inbound deny. So that's essentially any source to our all servers. So when these are the groups that I created earlier that now I can utilize. So I'm going to create a deny inbound, so any source to any of our servers on any service, and I'm going to apply that to all of our servers, okay, all of our application servers, and I'm going to drop that traffic. Likewise, I'm going to create a deny outbound from any of our application servers on any service, and I'm going to apply that to those servers as well, and we're going to drop traffic. Now, there's our sort of per application zero trust, right? Again, it's a brownfield environment. If this was greenfield and we were maybe onboarding applications, we already have the whitelist rules in place, great. But this is another way, another option that we can look at it on a per application basis. Because again, overnight, we're not going to onboard things and to deny all traffic to all applications. In a real world, we might want to onboard per application by application by application. So while these rules propagate to all of my ESXi hosts, we'll just give it a second, success there. So now if we drop back to the blog and hit refresh, that now is simply going to timeout. Okay, nice and simple. You'll have to take my word for it. We'll come back to that in a moment when it's timed out. In the interest of time, if I now start to flesh out the firewall rules, we will add a couple and we'll build these out. So we already know that web tier needs to talk to the database tier. So for this, the source will be one of our VM groups. We've got web servers here. So I'll add that. And as I said, that needs to talk to the database servers. Nice and simple. Okay, now we might want to, in the future, add additional tiers. Okay, so as opposed to applying it to all servers, what I'm going to do, I'm going to apply it to both web and database. We may want to create in the future more tiers. So by applying it to all servers may in the future actually have a negative impact. Okay, and the service obviously I need to add to this rule is MySQL. It's to query the backend database. So when our services list loads, we will either search for MySQL or 3306. There it is. Apply that there, and we'll set it to allow. But for the moment, I'm just going to disable this rule because I'll show you one thing in a moment. And then lastly, we need some sort of web connection from the outside world. Okay, so we'll just say public to web. Okay, so that's any source. Now, obviously, if it's an internal application or indeed an external application, you might want to be a bit more granular in the source. For the lab environment, any is fine. This will be trying to access our web server group. Again, nice and dynamic. So if we scale out these web servers, we've got the option there to, we don't need to essentially amend any of these firewall rules. That's a web server, so nice and simply, we need 443, but because it's might be utilizing port 80 as well, in this case, we'll search for HTTP, and we'll just add both services. In this example, we are only referencing the web servers, so I will apply that to the web servers. So effectively what we've built out, okay, is a per application firewall policy. So effectively what we're doing by default is implementing zero trust around this specific application, okay? So we're denying any traffic from the outside world to all of the servers, and likewise, all of the servers cannot talk to any other server by these two drop rules, okay? And then above this, we add our whitelist rules. So the web database, the web tier can talk to the database tier over MySQL. Perfect. We've identified that in Network Insight, and we've also identified that the access to the web servers needs to be via ports 80 and 443. What I'm going to do to start with, I'm just going to disable the web to DB tier, and I'm just going to publish this. So what effectively we're allowing is web access to the web server. But just as an example here that, you know, this isn't pre-recorded, I'll effectively go back to my web application. It's doing a refresh here. Might take a second because these rules are propagating to the databases. Stop that and refresh. I've only tested this a few hundred times, and today it tends to go slow. Of course it does. Let me just check these. So we've got any source to our web servers on ports for HTTP and HTTPS. We've applied that to the web servers and we've set it to allow. So one more refresh. Let's launch it in a new tab. The demo gods are obviously not on my side today.
My fault tempting fate, I'm afraid, Gareth.
I know. What's going on? Well, we might have to come back to this one, I think.
Did you hit publish? Or did I miss that?
Yeah, publish is done. I know, I think I know what it is. So that's going to time out, apologies. That's going to time out anyway, but in a moment, what we should see, and this is by design, right? I've not enabled the rule. So what we're seeing is traffic trying to hit the web front end. Now it's actually doing that, but in a moment we'll see it time out, and the web front end is going to report back that it can't communicate with its database. So there's me being all worried and flustering. And of course, by design there, we've got our web server actually talking back to us. So I broke my own rule and rushed, and there we go. Okay, so we know web services are up, but of course, because of the web tier to database tier, we are essentially still down. But again, we've proven and proved that web services are up. So now by enabling access between the web and the database tier itself, again, we'll just wait to show success. Now, when we refresh it, we're back into the web application or the WordPress application, and we can again browse around. Okay, and we're back. So essentially what we would then want to do is maybe implement another few rules, maybe for appliance management, SSH, SFTP, things like that, okay? And we'll build that up as we go based on what Network Insight has told us here. Now, on larger scale operations, that might not be as quick and easy. Also, there are other tools out there that do work directly with NSX-T, such as NSX Intelligence. Again, it's kind of Network Insight made turbo. And again, that will integrate fully with NSX-T so that those rules can be created quite dynamically. But again, it's worth noting that you'll always need some form of validation checks, okay, in generally conjunction with the network security teams. So let's just jump back to the slide deck. Still nicely on time, so just close up in a moment. I think I've got about 7 minutes left. Hopefully you can see the slide deck once again. So essentially what we implemented within that scenario, we utilized Network Insight, right, to analyze the collected firewall rules, analyze the collected data and traffic flows. We identified a number of ports. We identified several ports which weren't valid, or we identified as not valid, or certainly that we wouldn't want to allow, such as public NTP access, public queries to port 80 to servers in different continents. Those would be locked down by design by those default inbound and outbound deny rules. And we essentially allowed port 443 access to the web server and the required access from web to DB servers over port 3306. So then, in conclusion, and if there are any questions, obviously we've got a few minutes left, but in conclusion, again, it comes down to understanding your applications, okay? We still need that manual understanding. Talk to your application owners, talk to your developers and software vendors for that critical documentation, because at the end of the day, using Network Insight will sort of visualize the traffic flows, but what it won't do is tell you whether that is innocent or not. Okay, you actually have to do some validation checks in conjunction with your development teams and your security teams to validate those traffic flows. And if this loads, next slide. As I mentioned earlier, diolch I bawb, Michael, diwrnod gwych. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a great day. A few pieces of resources and further reading there. As I mentioned, back towards the end of last year in December, I wrote a 6-part sort of article, which naturally flowed into part 1, 2, 3 around network insight. It sort of went down pretty well. As I mentioned, part 6 there was about importing the recommended firewall rules from network insight into NSX via Python script. And again, a big shout out there to Martin Smith, who kind of wrote the book on the subject, right? So that is available for either purchase, download, and it's well worth a read if you are interested in utilizing network insight, because it covers such a broad range of features of network insight. Today we've really played with just the tip of the iceberg on one area, I suppose. So again, if that is of interest, brilliant. Feel free to take a look at the blog post series. Also, on Twitter, also Martin Smith on Twitter, absolutely fantastic resource there. And a shout out there again, as Simon mentioned this morning, around vMware Advantage, because if these are technologies or products that you're interested in playing with, then either via vExpert programs or vMware Advantage, you can sort of really spin them up in your lab and really get to grips and play with these products as well. So thank you very much again. Thanks for having me. Linda, Simon, the guys, Gareth, thanks for the invite as well. And it's been great to chat to you today.
No worries. Thanks, Gareth. That was really good. So, I mean, we've got a bit of time. So do we have any questions for Gareth?
Can I ask you a question, Gareth?
Yes, Rick, of course.
So going back to one of your earlier slides, you had a diagram with the physicals in there, really near the beginning. So physicals, is that with the guest agent on it? And how does that interact with NI? And what about when things come from outside your, let's call it private cloud, if you're, say, coming from another VPC or something? How do you deal with those things that are external, like your physicals and separate VPC?
So depending on your licensing type, then you can actually license some physical kit as well. Switches, for example, so you can track the flow across your physical environment also. But generally, yeah, we call out physical kit. Yeah, we can generally identify those based on IP across the network. Have you got a scenario sort of in mind that you'd sort of?
Oh yeah, we've got things like I don't know, your critical national infrastructure people that have, let's call it politely, legacy equipment, which is on air-gapped physical tin that's been there for decades and they can't switch off. So they want to put a guest agent on it. So they are resisting putting it into the virtualized world, and we still have to put micro-seg to those devices. That's one.
Yeah. So of course, yeah, you'd look at those via IP, and then maybe you could integrate those into NSX-T via agents if you want to. That's a good discussion. Let me put a few thoughts around that, and I'll come back to you with a few thoughts.
Because the guest agent's quite new, isn't it? It's only been out a couple of minor versions.
Yeah, the guest agent I've not worked with in the past, but yeah, all the documentation is there ready for it. So let me delve into that, and I'll.
I've only had a quick read, but it seems it's quite a nice idea that you can include those horrible physical-y things into your rule sets.
And they're always going to exist.
Yeah,
they're always going to exist, right? We're not 100% virtual yet. We're never going to be, but try as we might.
I've even walked into a room where a physical box had yellow tape, you know, the ribbon tape, diagonal tape around it, saying do not cross this line, sort of thing. It's like, why is that? Because we can't buy spare parts for it anymore.
Yeah, can't afford for it to break down. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
So presumably the guest agents, a similar approach used if you've got stuff running in one of the public cloud providers.
Sorry, Simon, what was that again?
Yeah, I was going to say if you've got VMs running in, I don't know, Azure or AWS or whatever, but native VMs, the guest agent presumably is the approach you use there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
yeah, and the trouble is when you have VPCs in different areas, unless you've got federated NSX-T, you don't know about them. So I haven't come across a solution for that yet.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Gareth. That was